And we're live. Greetings, Vaccines Revealed community. Great to be with you. We have been working with our very special guest, Mary Holland, and she's been having some technical difficulties trying to get into this webcast through her computer, but you can see her smiling face right now as she's able to join us via her phone. So yeah, maybe the sound in the video is not as good as it could be, but the information is why you're here, and that's going to be 5 stars out of 5. So, so very excited. So, Mary, thanks so much for taking time with us.
Thank you.
So, can we just start? I mean, I think everybody that's on this webcast is familiar with you, and they would be through certainly our Vaccines Revealed series and in the whole vaccine movement. You know, you're very present because you're very important. But can you just give us a bit of your background and how you ended up in this movement?
Sure. I guess it goes back, Patrick, about 18 years. I had a child who, I followed standard medical advice and vaccinated according to the schedule. And he was diagnosed with autism around a little before age 3. And like any, normal parent, I wanted to figure out what went wrong. And, the people who told me, oh, it's just God's plan, that made no sense to me. Why it had suddenly occurred made no sense. And so I did research, and I connected with scientists and parents and physicians who elucidated for me the connection between toxicity and autism, and in particular vaccines and autism. And sort of following a biome progressed enormously and substantially recovered. That's how I got involved, but I'm a lawyer by training, Patrick. And so I wanted to contribute in some way to this movement that I thought was critical to literally the health of the planet. And so I thought I would bring to bear my legal training and started to study vaccine law and policy. And to be honest with you, was appalled at the lack of accountability built into the system. And that's really what I've been continuing to work on over the years I've been involved.
Yeah, and you're not just a lawyer, but I mean, you've got some pretty serious credentials. I think you're a professor, a law professor at NYU right now.
Yes, I'm the director of the graduate lawyering program. I've been there for 17 years, and I work with foreign lawyers and train them in research, writing, and analysis. And in my own work, in my own scholarship, I really have focused on vaccines and also issues around informed consent and medical ethics.
Yeah, and I think this is kind of very much the crux of the issue as we're dealing with ethical issues and legal issues relative to a parent's right or an individual's right to choose what substances are put into their body and how the government might compel them to do so. And you know, it's different, I know, state by state as far as, you know, what kind of burdens are put on individuals relative to this issue. But you know, where maybe discuss some of the evolution of the work, that the legal work that you've done in this arena and how it's been applied, and then maybe you know, how you've been trying to support people who've been compromised.
Sure. So, the bedrock, as you suggest, the bedrock of medical ethics is informed consent. And this has been an ethic of over generations, but it really became codified in medical ethics and then in law after World War II, where there were so many medical atrocities. And encoded in US federal law and state law is the right to informed consent. And yet, as you point out, the vaccine program is really based on the notion of compulsion, and that somehow, in order to achieve herd immunity, everybody must be compelled to participate in this program. And of course, there's bioindividuality. People are not the same genetically. They have different risk factors, they have different genes. So this compulsion doesn't fall on people equally in any way. And although in every state by law there's medical exemptions, the reality is there's no pre-screening, and religious exemptions exist in 47 states today. And there's attempts to sort of claw away at them. And philosophical exemptions have been going down. It's a minority of states that now have philosophical exemptions. So the bottom line is there's not true informed consent for vaccination. And vaccination, as your viewers surely know, is a very serious medical intervention that can have lifelong consequences and even consequences of death.
Yeah. even life ending. So while we're here, and I see we got a bunch of people joining us out there, Krista, maybe you want to welcome a few people and see if anybody's got particular questions they want to throw out right now, or Mary and I will continue the conversation. And incidentally, everybody, stay tuned because we do have a special treat for you, an unannounced bonus, I guess I'll call it, that's coming up in the second half of the program, and especially for you people interested in Gardasil and other such things, you want to stay tuned. So go ahead, Krista.
All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Yes, I'd love to welcome everybody joining us outside on the Facebook page. So we'll welcome Donna Frizzell out of London, Ontario. We'll also welcome Mindy Johnson-Pownell and Tim Kelly, Ronit Rosen, Irina Godunko, Sandra Jevany, and Julie White. So thank you all for checking in. And we see so many more of you out there. Let us know if you haven't already checked in outside on the Facebook page. Post your name, where you're hanging out from, and of course, any questions or comments that you have for the conversation this evening. And be on the lookout for that special guest here just shortly. But wonderful to have Mary here with us as well. So let's go ahead and dive in.
Thanks, Krista.
I'm just going to plug in my phone because otherwise I think we could run out of juice, which would be unfortunate. So bear with us for technical difficulties.
Go ahead. Let me know when you're plugged in and ready to go.
I think we can go ahead. I'm just trying to see if we can plug it in so that we don't lose power.
Okay, I'm going to talk for a minute while you're doing that also. So
that'd be great, Patrick.
Anyway, folks, something that you all might be interested in. Right now I'm coming to you. You can tell I'm in a hotel room, not my normal environment. And I'm in Austin, Texas. I've been traveling a lot lately. I was just in Europe. I was in New Zealand just a couple of days ago now in Austin. And we're filming and we're picking up some final footage for a new project that we're releasing next month, which is a Healing from Vaccines Masterclass. One of the things I want to tell you, and I think all of you are on our Vaccines Revealed list. If you're not, make sure that you are. Go to vaccinesrevealed.com and find a way to opt in somewhere around there, maybe just see the series or something like that. It's free, and you just, I think, first name and email, and that way you'll be on our list and we can communicate. But one of the things that the number one question we were getting from parents and people in general after we did Vaccines Revealed, which was literally the views were in the millions of views on that project. But the biggest question we were getting is, well, what do I do now? What do I do if I now don't want to vaccinate my kid? Is there anything that I can do to help boost their immune function? And what do I do if I've got a kid that's toxic, or maybe a kid that's injured as a result of vaccines? What actions can we take? So I happen to come across many practitioners across the country, different types of practitioners, but all natural health practitioners who have been literally specializing in helping vaccine-injured children, who had a variety of phenomenal advice on what you can do to help and support your children or your child or yourself, because adults also have been injured by vaccines. So with that, we have put together this masterclass. The final interviews, I'm actually here in Austin doing this weekend. Some phenomenal things that I've been discovering. As a matter of fact, I just a little while ago got out of a hyperbaric chamber, because that's what one practitioner does, who's been working with autistic kids and vaccine damaged kids, and he always says he's getting a lot of results using that. So I got in the chamber and said, let me see what this is. So nonetheless, there's this class is called the Healing from Vaccines Masterclass. Be on the lookout next month. We're gonna release it again, and we're gonna release it free to the entire world. If anybody wants to purchase it, certainly you're welcome to. But I just want to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to see it, and there'll be no cost for doing so. So just be on the lookout for your emails for when that Healing from Vaccines Masterclass is going to come out. So are we plugged in, Mary? Ready to go?
We're back, yes. And Patrick, that's great news. Certainly that's always a question is, what are the healing modalities that work? What's safe? And, I wish that there were more science in this area. I wish there were more attention paid, but certainly there's a whole variety of healing methodologies that are out there that are successful. So that's fantastic that you're spreading that knowledge.
Yeah, thank you. And as you described earlier, people biologically are different, so their response to vaccines are going to be different. And to try to have a compulsion to do this thing that presents risk and varied risk, to people is a problem. And as I've come to find out, the solutions also vary as far as what's going to work for what people. And that's where this was a great journey, at least for me, because I really got to talk to some very intelligent people with a lot of experience, with boots on the ground experience, working with these people and these children, and they're very different in their approaches, but the results that they get are extremely gratifying. So I know that people are searching for answers, and if one thing doesn't happen to get a result that you're looking for, I want people to know that there's multiple other options that you should be exploring, none of which are toxic and all of which maybe provide an upside.
Right, absolutely.
So what are you most passionate about right now in the whole vaccine issue, Mary, that you're spending maybe the majority of your time on?
Well, thanks, Patrick. So I've just, with my co-authors, Kim Mack Rosenberg and Eileen Iorio, completed a book called The HPV Vaccine on Trial, Seeking Justice for a Generation Betrayed. And I'm going to take the opportunity to show you a copy of the book hot off the presses. Let's see if you can see this. But we're very proud of this book. Which can now be, which is now available. It'll be in bookstores October 2nd and available for order, but it's for pre-order now on Amazon. And the reason we really took this on is we wanted to take a truly deep dive in what we saw as a story we could tell from beginning to end. This vaccine only came on the market 11 years ago. And so there really was an opportunity not to go back to polio, not to go back to smallpox, not to go back to everything about MMR over the world, but to see a vaccine from inception and how it was being literally promoted around the world in over 125 countries and millions of doses, two of the major vaccine manufacturers. And so what we've learned is that the clinical trials for this particular vaccine, which is meant to prevent cervical cancers and other cancers related to the HPV virus, human papillomavirus, that the trials were fatally flawed. The clinical trials were never really done to prove that the vaccines were effective and safe. The trials really were very connected to the marketing of the vaccine. And remarkably, this vaccine, although it's advertised around the world as an anti-cancer vaccine, as if it has been proven to prevent cancer, in fact, it's never been proven to prevent cervical cancer or any other cancer. And sadly, the reality is, in the 11 years that it's been on the market and the many years before that when it was in clinical trials, it's injured people and it's caused death in young people. And those deaths and those injuries have now been studied in hundreds of scientific articles. There are thousands of reported injuries and deaths, serious injuries, colitis, posture, sort of heart problems, balance problems, gastrointestinal problems, and death. And it's very important within this last year, a case that lasted over 8 years in the US court for vaccine injury. It's called the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program. The case of a death of a young woman who died after the third dose of the Gardasil vaccine, that was compensated as having proved more likely than not that the vaccine caused her death. And what's really important there is, although the Department of Justice and Health and Human Services contested this, after the decision by the special master, the fact finder in the case, the Department of Justice did not appeal that decision. In other words, if they thought that they could have countered the fact that the vaccine caused the death, they would have done so. But they didn't want to appeal that case because they thought they might lose on appeal and it would set more of a precedent. But there are hundreds of cases that have already been compensated for harm by the HPV vaccine in the United States, and there are registries of harm elsewhere, and there are legal cases being brought against governments and against other institutions, including Merck and GlaxoSmithKline around the world about this specific vaccine. This particular vaccine, I think, raises all of the issues that you recognize with other vaccines, but it raises them in a very specific, acute way. And I think if we look at this one vaccine that's the most recent one on schedules around the world, we can really, through it, see a prism of problems that are endemic to vaccines.
First of all, congratulations on the book. I know it's no small task to get a book done, and I'm sure, given your academic background, it's quite scholarly and done right. So you know that's no small thing. Again, I think the name of it was the HPV vaccine on trial, correct?
Correct,
And
exactly.
and literally, isn't that all anybody in this movement wants is a hearing? we want to
That's exactly right.
we want a
That's
fair hearing to look at the
that's right.
facts.
That's exactly right, Patrick. We want the opportunity to really hear the science and to hear all the evidence. That's what we want and we need. And one of the things that is exciting about this vaccine, it's it's bittersweet, but there are trials ongoing around the world, in India, in Colombia, in Japan, and in the United States. And these are cases against the manufacturers and cases against the government for promoting a vaccine that causes such significant injuries. And because
Well,
it's so, one of the cases, the case in California that's ongoing right now, specifically is alleging that there was fraud in the marketing and that there was a failure of informed consent because people weren't given adequate information to make informed decisions about this vaccine.
well, and here's one of the things that I'm somewhat perplexed. The FDA, when you're making claims about the application of any drug or intervention for that matter, you know, you really have to demonstrate, you know, efficacy based on research and data, and even when it's done properly, as far as you're complying with this certain FDA edicts, it's still fraught with problems, and what actually gets to the market is not necessarily so proven as one might like to believe. But in this case, you said something that I think is horrific, in the sense that how is it that the FDA will allow these pharmaceutical companies or the Gardasil manufacturer to say that it's, you know, they call it a cancer prevention intervention, you know, with and there's no data on that, no evidence of that, yet the FDA isn't jumping all over them.
Yeah, well, one of the things that comes out in the book, and we discuss at length, is really how, in our view, the FDA fell down on the job, right? So, from the get go in these clinical trials, there never was a true placebo. There was never a true control to test against this vaccine. The so called placebos that we call a faux-cibo contained the adjuvant that's used in the vaccine. So, it wasn't a true, neutral control. And why it's permissible for them to say that it's anti-cancer. Well, the rationale is that it does show evidence that it diminishes the number of precancerous lesions. But then they take the leap of faith. Well, if it diminishes precancerous lesions, then it diminishes cancer. That hasn't been proven. And the flip side is also of note, Patrick. So the clinical trials also showed that in some people who actually previously had cervical infections, who had HPV infections, it raised their risks of getting lesions, of getting precancerous lesions. And this they call negative efficacy. But this is really troubling. They don't really make that clear, and they don't screen people to see if they may actually have indicators that suggest that it might increase their risk of cancer. So that's one of the very troubling things that happened in these clinical trials.
Now, one of the or some experts have indicated to me that as far as adverse events reporting, that Gardasil is now the highest of any vaccine. Is that true?
It's true that in the American Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, there's a higher proportion in the age cohort. There's a higher proportion of injuries reported for Gardasil than for any other typically administered childhood vaccine or pediatric young adult vaccine. So it's got a very high proportion. And certain doctors who are very knowledgeable about the HPV vaccines have estimated that the severe injury rate is 1 in 500. That's an unacceptably high rate of injury in something that's being administered, attempting to be administered universally.
That's disturbing.
It's very disturbing.
That and you cited this, is that this is a newer vaccine. So you would figure that what's been learned from the older vaccines, that this should be the best, the safest, most efficacious of them because it's one of the more recent vaccines. And yet we're seeing that it's got the most, adverse reporting events. And personally, through the work that we do in Vaccines Revealed, I've come across some extraordinarily tragic and sad stories about healthy teenage girls getting this vaccine, and they are, they're debilitated. I mean, they're handicapped for life in severe ways, and every one of them is so heartbreaking. And the thing that I find almost like it's your heart can't take it is the parents who basically said, I thought, we're doing the right thing. We're following the recommendations of the doctors. We wanted to make sure that our daughter was protected. And the next thing you know, they're dealing with a handicapped kid that their whole life and all the dreams are all just derailed and destroyed. It's beyond comprehension. And you go back to informed consent, and the whole point of informed consent is for a physician to communicate to the patient the potential risks of whatever intervention they're recommending for them. That never happens in vaccines.
You're entirely right, Patrick. And one of the sort of the most important, there are two really important parts of the book I want to highlight. One is that there's a photo insert where we show pictures of children who are perfectly healthy, and then they're incredibly incapacitated, or pictures of gravestones, kids who died. And then we show the marketing for this by governments, by foundations, and by industry has just been overwhelming. And this is a huge moneymaker, right? This is billions of dollars in revenue. And I want to point out that also we're very privileged that a preface was written for the book by Dr. Luc Montagnier, a Nobel Prize winner. So this is somebody who won a Nobel Prize for the discovery of the HIV virus. This is like a mainstream scientist on viruses. And this person says the HPV vaccine is scandalous. It's a tragedy what's happening to young people. So we are very hopeful that this book will get a fair reading by people in the medical and scientific community, as well as parents. Because as you point out, it's parents at the end of the day, and the children themselves, and young adults, and now older adults who are being recommended to get this vaccine. These are the people who have to live with the consequences.
Yeah, sadly so. It is just very, it's about as sad as anything I can imagine or I've ever witnessed. And I'm thrilled about this book. So I'm encouraging people to support it, to get the book, order it, and pre-order it, I guess, at this point, and it should be released soon, since I saw a book cover just moments ago.
That's right.
And all I can say is thank God for you in taking the time, effort, and energy to assemble these facts and this information, because it's critical that it's published and put into the world.
Well, it's not me alone. So my co-authors, Kim Mack-Rosenberg and Eileen Iorio, played, yeoman roles. It's a huge amount of information. So I'm so glad we only chose one with an 11-year history, because frankly, looking at a 60 or 80-year history, as some of these vaccines have, would have been virtually impossible. But even looking at this story over 11 years is an enormous amount of information. Looking at the science, looking at the marketing, looking at the injury reports, looking at how the governments have dealt with this. And one of the things you raised is not only are parents struck with the horror that their child is now debilitated, but as soon as the parents try to get treatment, they're told by doctors, oh, this is in your head, or oh, this would have happened anyway, or oh, this could never possibly be the vaccine. And they're marginalized. The kids don't get adequate treatment from mainstream medicine. And the parents are often, and the children are branded as anti-vaccine. And one of the remarkable things is this is happening the world over, because this vaccine is being promoted the world over.
Yeah, I mean, talk about insult to injury, that you're dealing with this horrific circumstance, then you're told it's all in your head, which is very, a very common response, not just on Gardasil, but all the vaccines. And a parent knows, and that's where I think a lot of people have risen up and become activists, because it's just so wrong. And you got to look at the psychodynamics, right? I mean, if you're a physician and you're recommending this stuff for people, you don't want to, in your own mind, you're probably in denial. You don't want to admit that you're recommending something that's destroying families. So they don't want it to be true.
No, they certainly don't want it to be true, and they don't know very much. That's one of the fascinating things, Patrick. What we've learned in talking to pediatricians and talking to gynecologists is they take on faith what the CDC and the FDA and the European Medicines Agency, what they tell them. They really don't have the time or the inclination to dig deep in the clinical trial data as we did. And, so they are getting misinformation too. It's not just the public that's being misinformed. The doctors themselves are being misinformed. They're not being told the full story by the drug companies or by the medical regulatory agencies. And that's part of the story, right? Is that real information isn't getting out there about these products.
Yeah, well, hopefully it will be now with the advent of your book. Any last thoughts that you'd like to share before we introduce your special guest?
Let's see. I think I think no question that we're making headway, Patrick. One last thing. So on this HPV story, I don't know if you've paid attention, but there's been a big disruption in what's called the Cochrane Collaboration, which is a multinational group of scientists that focus on evidence-based medicine. And one of the members, the founding members, who's been outspoken, Peter Gutcha, was just expelled from the governing board, and several other people have resigned in response to that. And I think that we're starting to see now in mainstream science and medical circles a true controversy about the science behind this particular vaccine. And I think we, as people who want to reveal the truth generally about vaccines, I think we need to pay attention to this particular story. And I would say that activists have been created around the world, particularly about this particular vaccine. In Japan, in Colombia, in other countries, there are marches just related to this particular, the HPV vaccine. But our special guest has arrived, so I am very happy to turn over the floor, and thank you so much, Patrick.
Will you do the honors of the introduction?
I would be happy to. So I'm about to introduce and give the screen to JB Handley, author of How to End the Autism Epidemic. And it is my privilege to hand over the phone.
All right. High tech.
You see yourself right.
Here we are.
Here's this Patrick.
Oh, hi, Patrick.
JB, how are you?
I am doing great.
We are. I'm really. This was a very pleasant surprise. So great that you guys were together, and that you also have a new book out, and you've been very active in doing some great work in the world. So can we just start and have you give us a bit of your background and how you got involved in this whole thing?
Yes, I was conscripted like every other parent by watching my son decline into autism after multiple vaccine appointments. So I would say that I was as mainstream as they come. And my wife and I ceded all the decisions about our children's health to our local pediatrician. We had the same goal that every other parent has, which is that we wanted healthy babies and we wanted our boys to be safe. And we had our first son, and he got through the vaccine schedule without massive injury. But our second son experienced a stair-step decline after nearly every vaccine appointment. And the stair-step was a combination of physical deterioration, and then the neurological deterioration came a little bit later. And, the blinders started to come off, and what the hell's going on? And our pediatrician really had no good explanation for us as things got worse and worse and worse. And I tell the story in the introduction to my book that we faced a fork in the road where we took our son to UCSF. We were living in the Bay Area. We took our son to UCSF to get diagnosed for autism, and we were told all the classic things about institutionalization and nothing you can really do and genetic. And they went so far as to even tell us, because we'd started to do a little bit of research, that things like the diet and whatever were placebos for parents, but they really had no efficacy. At the same time, we went the alternate route and went down and saw a Dan doctor in Pleasanton, California. And she presented a very different world to us, a world where there's an environmental insult, where the children can get better and recover, where her own son was recovering, and she was also an MD. And so we're sitting there looking, and neither my wife nor I is a doctor. I'm a business person, my wife too. And we're saying to ourselves, they can't both be telling the truth. Both things can't be true. It can't be a permanent genetic condition that we can't do anything about, and it can't be an environmentally induced condition that we can recover our son from. Those things can't stand together and be true. And yet these doctors are 30 miles apart, and they're telling us completely different things. And it was at that point that we realized that we were kind of on our own to make the right call. And I guess we jumped down the rabbit hole from that moment on. And, soon after we kind of got going on the whole recovery front, we started an organization called Generation Rescue in 2005. And its purpose was really to share information about how children recover from autism to other parents. That was really its only purpose. Jenny McCarthy found that website like a year later. She became the president of the organization. And ever since then, I've just sort of chosen to speak my mind. And whether I write blogs or go on TV shows or whatever, I don't profit from autism. I won't profit from my book. I don't profit from Generation Rescue. I just do it to try to warn other parents about all that I've learned. And my book is really it's kind of an encyclopedia of everything that I have learned about how we've kind of gotten to this point. And so I not only disassemble many of the lies about autism and vaccines in general, which of course you spend a lot of time dismantling quite well yourself. But then I also talk about the truth. There's so much truth now that we know about how exactly a vaccine causes autism, the vaccine court, parent testimonials, et cetera. So my book is sort of a complete encyclopedia, if you will, of everything that I've learned and understand about this topic.
And I think it's important to note. I mean, you're academically in your background, you're a Stanford grad, correct?
I went to Stanford. I majored in economics and East Asian studies. So I'm a business person with an economics background, and and my wife went to Stanford as well. Yeah.
So and what is typical, I think, in your story, and this is, I think, the thing that you're trying to disrupt, is the fact that hey, you are well-educated people, going to one of the best schools in the entire world, and you're going to raise a family together, and you're following, the process as it's prescribed, by people who are supposed to be in the know, and then you find out that it's the emperor's got no clothes. It's a very it's something that is deceptive in its whole application into the culture.
It was a very complex and disturbing time in our life as those the shades kind of came off, right? You feel a little unmoored by the whole experience, and you actually lose kind of faith in mankind for a moment in the process. It's a complex thing that people go through, and it's allowed me to both respect and understand why some people have such violent reactions to the things that I say or the things that you say when we talk about these things, because it's very, very scary to think that everything that you believed and understood is actually not even true. And I'm thankful we got through that time and to the other side. I feel like we've, in effect, saved our son, if you will, because we took him off the vaccine path. We got him onto the biomed path. He's a far healthier and happier human being today. And if we hadn't had the opportunity to go meet with that Dan doctor, where she was a super credible person and could kind of introduce this different world to us, I don't know how my son would be doing right now. The other thing I want to mention to your audience, and I know that you know this because I see many of the guests that you have on, but I think the biggest shock when you get into the world that I run in is how many doctors, how many scientists agree with everything we're saying. This is not a parents versus the scientists. I mean, look who I'm talking to. I'm talking to a doctor. And there are so many who are speaking up more and more and telling the truth. And I think that should be something that gives people confidence that this thing is moving in the right direction. And you know what? There are so many who are speaking publicly, but then I get so many people who whisper to me behind the scenes who aren't quite ready to take on the personal risk that comes along with it, but still tell me. I mean, even CDC employees, hey, you're doing the right thing. Hey, keep it up. I mean, it's like the emperor has no clothes. Everybody knows. And so I'm heartened by that in terms of hopefully where this movement is going, this movement of restoring the health of our kids, which to me is what this is ultimately really about. We have the sickest generation we've ever had, and it's deeply disheartening.
Yeah, and it's an issue of conscience, for many people. And like you said, I've had people whisper to me, but they can't go public because of how vicious the responses and the attacks are. If you're a person, especially if you're a research scientist, and you start to question anything, I mean, the level of attack and venom that's spewed is almost incomprehensible. When we did Vaccines Revealed, I can't even tell you the horrific names that I was called. People, wanting me to die, that I'm going to be responsible for the death of many children because of this, this propaganda I'm spreading. I'm a baby killer. I mean, it was, a lot of really about as vicious as I've ever seen human beings become. So,
I've been called it all.
yeah.
You know,
So
I'm
you get it.
yeah, yeah, and I've initiated a campaign of hate because I've called autism an epidemic. That's the other side of it, right? You have kind of you're going to allow babies to die, and you think people with autism shouldn't be on the planet or something. So it's a very, very vicious fight. But I'm sturdied by the evidence and the truth. And that, I got taught a long time ago, if you just keep telling the truth, things will happen the right way. And I think one of the shocking things that's in my book that people are just starting to realize is that two of the most mainstream autism scientists in the world, who are both from Kennedy Krieger at Johns Hopkins, are not just quoted in my book, but I actually quote depositions of theirs in my book, where they say unequivocally that 30 to 50% of children with autism get that way from their vaccines when they have a mitochondrial disorder of some kind. And this is new information and kind of earth-shattering information. And not only do they say this, and again, Kennedy Krieger, the probably leading autism institute in the world, but one of those two doctors, Dr. Andrew Zimmerman, he was the lead witness for the government during the 2009 omnibus autism proceeding. And Dr. Zimmerman is basically alleging judicial fraud on the part of the Department of Justice during that proceeding. And if that proceeding had gone the other way, we'd be living in a very, very different world as it comes to autism. So I hope that the scale of what Dr. Zimmerman is saying, the importance of what he's saying, is going to start to be understood. I'm not sure the mainstream media will ever pick up on it, but it's the most groundbreaking part of my book, the most revelatory part of my book that people don't know about. And I basically say that, one of the titans of mainstream autism science agrees with parents 100%, and in a deposition where he was sworn to tell the truth.
And I think that's a very fine point you put on it, because it's one thing to say that he's made the statement, it's another thing to say that he's doing it under oath. So that adds a lot of, yeah.
Yeah, the depositions of Dr. Zimmerman and Dr. Kelly are very, very revealing for someone who reads them from front to back. And they even say things like, well, the CDC says vaccines don't cause autism, but the data doesn't show that. They just do that for public health reasons. So they're very forthright in understanding what's actually going on. And I take great comfort in knowing that my book has their words in it, because those are the words of experts who I think can really change this debate.
So let's talk about the book. So basically, how to end the autism epidemic. So I guess in the punchline, what is the how, or are there multiple hows?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm going to refer to Zimmerman and Kelly again, because one of the things that those two doctors from Kennedy Krieger say in their depositions is that we have to screen vulnerable children before their first vaccine. They feel very strongly about this, and they think that with that screening, you could remove the kids who maybe are headed towards autism from being in the vaccine pool altogether. And I think that's a really important topic that needs to start to become part of the national conversation. Of course, in order to have that conversation, you have to concede that vaccines can in fact cause autism. They've obviously already made it over that hurdle, so they're talking about screening. So my book actually goes into a pretty extensive recommendation for how to reduce the autism epidemic. And so I effectively recommend going back to the 1985 vaccination schedule. I recommend delaying many of those vaccines. I recommend a pre-screening before the first vaccine is ever given to a child. I recommend that titer tests are given instead of booster shots. And so my recommendations probably bring the vaccine load down by 75%, but also screen out most of the vulnerable kids. So it's kind of interesting. I get a lot of flack from sort of the vaccine abolitionists of the world, who think that the only recommendation should be to go to zero vaccines. And of course, I'm sympathetic to, and I understand their argument, but I'm actually trying to put something on the table that will allow us to have a national debate about it, and to move towards something constructive where we can acknowledge that parents should have the right to use certain vaccines if they want them, but at the same time that we have a bloated schedule that's causing more chronic illness than it is preventing the diseases. And I think that whole risk-reward construct has gotten really out of whack. People don't get the information they need to make that. So in the final chapters of my book, I recommend this sort of plan to reduce the vaccination schedule enough and put enough safety thresholds in place that we can actually bring the autism number down.
And incidentally, you sort of cited this, but having having a child become autistic as a consequence of vaccines, there are lesser damages that are done that maybe they don't become autistic, but there's other health and chronic health issues that can ensue that also, maybe it's not as extreme as autism, but there's still issues.
Absolutely. I talk about this in my book in quite a bit, because I agree with you, of course, that autism is really the tip of the iceberg. And a child who has diabetes or a deadly food allergy or ADHD, it's my opinion that in most cases that child is suffering from the same source of injury as my son, but it's manifesting differently. And I think when you step back and you think about, I mean, clearly vaccines are causing autoimmunity. I think that's a scientific certainty. I personally believe it's scientific certainty that it's causing neurological damage in autism as well. And I go through a lot of that new science in my book too. But when you start to think about the scale of destruction and what we've really done to these children, and you include things like autoimmunity, the other neurological disorders, and diabetes, it's like there's very few kids who aren't affected. And I think the scale of that statement is very hard for most people to even take on, because it's just so horrifying and awful.
It really is. The book is it released now? Is it available?
It is. It's on Amazon. We had an interesting first day because it's sold out on Amazon
Wow.
on day one.
Congratulations.
But I would beg parents to keep ordering from Amazon, because having a high ranking on Amazon gives the book a lot of credibility. And I've been told that right now it says it's going to take like 2 months to get your book. I've been told that date's going to shrink down quite a bit. So it was a wonderful first day because it was released today. And I don't want to, I'll let the reviews of my book speak for themselves, but I would say that for many people to get from page 1 to page 250 of my book is a very transformative and affirming and emotional experience for them. And so I hope that you have the chance to read it. I hope that many reviewers do. I hope that many parents do. And honestly, most of the parents who know me, they already know a lot of what's in the book, but I hope they have the chance to share that with other emerging parents and with educators and with their pediatricians.
Yeah, I always find books are a great tool. And I get to order 2 new books today. One pre-ordered, and then I guess yours I'll be
Absolutely.
on the wait list. But I'll look forward to getting it. And just as a general sentiment for our audience, I think books are kind of like Far Side Simplicity. Like, nobody understands how much complexity goes into organizing information and then scrubbing it and putting it into a finished form of a manuscript that's ready for release. And this is this is no small task. Somebody's taken years typically of their life to give you something that you could read in a matter of hours. And it's always.
I'm glad I didn't know how much time it was going to take before I signed my publishing contract, or I never would have done it.
You're not the first author to have ever said that.
Yeah. I have a great publisher. Chelsea Green Publishing is my publisher. And, on an issue this controversial, I really couldn't ask for a better publisher. They've been wildly supportive of this book, and they knew full well how controversial it was going to be. So I'm very, very grateful that there are still people in the world with that kind of integrity.
Me too, because I have spoken to publishers about books in this genre, and typically they say we sympathize, but we just can't be in the crosshairs of this conflict. It's just not our thing.
Absolutely.
So
yeah.
And I get it, but like you said, somebody who's willing to just stand on the truth and let that be the driving force as to whether or not they want to publish is somebody I admire for sure.
Absolutely. They've been amazing. So I hope parents get a chance to read the book soon. And, I really hope that people on the other side of the debate read the book. I would like nothing more. I feel like we've somehow lost the ability to honor free speech and have a constructive discourse when we disagree. We're all adults. We have a massive crisis with our children. I put forth a very strong hypothesis on exactly how this is all happening. I hope some of the haters out there can actually put down their arms, read the book, and then come debate me. Let's see if there's any middle ground. Did everything I say a lie? Is it all not true? Are there some things you agree with? And as you well know, our side has a very clear explanation for where all these children have come from. The other side has no explanation.
That's right. And incidentally, and Chris, I'm going to ask for questions or comments in a moment, just so you're ready. You know,
Okay.
what's interesting about that is that there was, I think it was in 2016, the number one, it's 16 or 17, I think it was 16, the most commented Facebook post, which had over 80,000 comments, was when Mark Zuckerberg posted about his child being vaccinated.
Right.
And there was a reporter who reviewed the comments and wrote a whole article on this. And
Yeah.
it was interesting because the reporter happened to be sort of this pro-vax, science guy, and that we don't live on a flat earth, all that other BS that they just hurl out there as platitudes, but have no substance, that they use beneath it. And but the interesting, I think he kind of said this unwittingly, or maybe he was just trying to be honest. But he said what was interesting is that he referred to them, the anti-vaxxers, seem to be more rational and evidence-based in their responses, posting
Yeah.
links and evidence, etc.
I read that, and I know exactly what you're referring to, and it was hilarious. And we were like less vitriolic, more rational, and had many more citations. And that's my book. My book is dense with citations. So that's why I say I really hope that some of the people who are on the other side of this camp, who don't believe this is why we have so much autism, can read the book and debate me and say I disagree with this, and they got to agree with something. So yeah.
And I agree. So it's rather than because they said the other side was all ad hominem in their attacks. So the bottom line is and I would challenge anybody saying, okay, stop calling you a baby killer, stop the ad hominem attacks, take the data in the book and refute it and have an honest debate. And if you can do that,
Absolutely.
then you have some respect. But instead they just have to try to paint you as some monster,
Right.
or any of us as monsters.
Right. And take two of the titans of the mainstream autism world who both have reached the same conclusion that parents have, and tell me why they're wrong.
Yep. I'm very compelled by your argument.
Yeah.
So Chris, any questions or comments from people out there, or shout outs?
Sure. I'll do a quick round of shout outs really quickly and then hop to a question. So I'll welcome Paul Crespeak joining us, along with Trina Rogers, Wendy Zobak, Sharon Bacalar, and Nikki Verist. Thank you very much for checking in. So Sherwin had posted a question. Please, this is often very overlooked, but about 40 million plus Americans already have autoimmune conditions. I'm one of this growing up group. What steps do I need to take to avoid getting another vaccine ever?
Well, yeah. So, I mean, the first comment there is that maternal autoimmunity should be a red flag for vaccination, right? So if there's a history of maternal autoimmunity, that should, in my opinion, actually take a child out of the vaccination pool. And it used to be the case that the AAP, if a child had eczema, that was enough for them to say, don't vaccinate that child. And so then the next question is, well, how do I keep from getting vaccines? Well, we still live in a free country where, you can't have a medical procedure forced upon you. And so I would tell that person, choose your profession wisely. There are health professions where they do mandate that you get vaccines, but if you have a history of autoimmunity, you are at a far greater risk from vaccine injury. And so choose your profession wisely. Most professions don't require vaccinations. And 47 out of 50 states, if you have children who are in school, they can go to school without receiving vaccines too. So just get yourself educated on the law. But remember, this is still the United States. It is still a free country, and no one can force a medical procedure on you.
Yeah, so I echo all that. No doubt this should be glaring red flags, when you're saying that you already are dealing with autoimmunity. And so I would be very, I'd be avoiding vaccines, in a very serious way. Secondly, as far as solutions to autoimmunity, I would say that, like, as I said, next month we're going to be releasing online the Healing from Vaccines Masterclass. And I'll have, over a dozen experts that deal with this stuff all day long. Virtually all of them speak to autoimmunity and the way that they approach people who have autoimmune disease, and how they have solutions for that. So I'd like to say that there's, just do this, but there's really multiple points of view, multiple approaches. So, I would recommend watching that and then find the one that fits you.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that question, Wendy. And now this is interesting. So Trina Rogers had posted, my daughter's school is doing vaccinations for HPV, diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis, and meningococcal conjugate. I hope I said all of that correctly. And the school is actually walking in and having nurses administer these while the students are in class, if they are of age. A consent form is required to get them done, but when parents are split on that issue, it makes it very messy and very mucky.
I mean, I would just say it's a disaster. They're into the schools. They've infiltrated the schools, and many of these vaccines cause shedding after you get them. And many children you should have an ambulance ready if you're going to be vaccinating a large group of individuals, because people have extreme reactions right after a vaccine. I think it's crazy that a school would take on that kind of responsibility. And what I would say is that is common. And so parents should be hyper vigilant and aware, especially if they have a child who's over the age of 16, where I've heard of nurses who explain to that child, oh, you don't even need to tell your parents you're of age, because medical consent age in many states is 15 or 16. So be on your guard if that's not something you want to have happen, and recognize that unless you live in California, Mississippi, or West Virginia, you have every right to turn down a vaccine and still have your child in a normal school.
Yeah, that's chilling, to say the least. We got time maybe for one more, Krista?
Those were the only questions that
Okay.
were posted as of right now. So.
All right, cool. So, and incidentally, I can see the numbers. There's a very large group of you out there. A question that comes up incidentally is replay. This video will be up for at least the next 30 days on replay. So you can send any friends, just give them the link that you came to get here, and we'll be replaying this over and over again. Typically, there's 10 to 15,000 views, of this, over the 30-day period. So please send people, let them get this information. It's critical information. Again, I just want to also recommend How to End the Autism Epidemic, JB's new book, which is sold out on Amazon. Congratulations, first day, sold out.
Keep ordering. I promise there'll be more.
Just absolutely keep ordering, because you have to understand, not only when you order the book, and this will also go for Mary's book, the HPV vaccine on trial. I'm getting both. You should definitely get both. But understand, every time you order the book, what you're doing is you are placing a vote. You're showing support for this movement and this cause. The fact that these books would sell out, it says something about our culture that can't be ignored. So
no, it's exciting. We're number one in many different categories on Amazon right now for the book. You can go see for yourself, and I'm very encouraged by that and very gratified. And it's about the scale of destruction and the number of parents who know. So I think it's great to see, and I agree with you. Every order is a vote for that book and for a vote for the truth.
Yeah. So any final thoughts that you have, JB, before we tie up?
I always view my audience as parents. And so I would just say, if you're a parent and you're listening, please do your research. I wish I didn't beforehand. And I've paid a big price, but my son has paid an enormous price. And he had a history that never should have had him in the vaccination pool at all. He has every red flag that a child can have, with his genetic mutation, maternal autoimmunity, how he was presenting himself, etc. And so I wish someone had said what I'm saying right now, and had maybe woken me up to go, you know what, I'm just going to take a step back and think about these vaccines again and how important they are to my child, and think about what that guy said, because I wish I had. So that's what I would like to leave your viewers with.
Well, JB, thank God for your work, your efforts, what you're doing. Also for Mary, if she's still sitting next to you or standing next to you.
I think she's back having dinner, but I know if she was here, she would thank you for having her on. So
yeah, it was you were a surprised and unexpected treat today. So thrilled that you were able to join us. And you know what makes me really, really happy is the fact that you guys are together. That means you're talking about really great stuff. So
we are indeed. Mary Holland is one of my favorite people in the world. She's one of the smartest people I know, and the fact that she has the courage in her position to write a book about Merck's profit center shows you the kind of integrity that this woman has. So I think her book is incredibly important, and I think that HPV vaccine is, the stories I've heard about the damage that vaccine does for almost no benefit is just absolutely, it's so sad to read about, and I hope that her book makes a big difference.
Me too. Well, again, thanks for your time and sharing with us. Congratulations on the success of the book. Again, I recommend everybody go out and get the book. Even if it's on back order, it's worth the wait to get it. But order it and let people see that we are hungry for this
It
information.
exists, people. It exists.
Yeah, there it is.
Yeah.
Nice cover. So,
All right.
again, thank you very much. I hope our paths cross, one day soon. And again, congratulations on the book and its success. I think it's an enormous victory for this movement, and it shows that the masses are starting to wake up to what's going on here. So, thank you for that.
Awesome. Thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate it.
And Krista, as always, thanks for helping organize all this and making sure that it runs on time, and for engaged throughout this. So thanks for that. And for all of you who are watching in the Vaccines Revealed community, thanks for being a part of this community. We will continue to bring you updates and keep you informed. Hopefully, you are on our list, as far as the Vaccines Revealed list. If not, go to vaccinesrevealed.com and find a way to get on it. Also, if people want to purchase Vaccines Revealed, the program, I think below this video box somewhere you can get it. There's all the information there. You can find out what packages are available. But we've got some phenomenal content that people need to know about. It reveals the truth about vaccines, and I'll tell you, it's not pretty, but at least you know what the truth is. So thanks very much. Great to be with you, and I look forward to being with you again soon. Take care, everybody.